This video is about WebSockets using Express and Node.js. We're going to talk about the differences between WebSockets and HTTP, how they actually rely on each other, how we can combine them, and we're also going to build a very simple client and server application using WebSockets with Node.js and Express. So let's get started. So let us first see what's the difference between WebSockets and HTTP. So it is important to note that actually WebSockets run over HTTP, so over the ports 80 and 443. So for HTTPS and HTTP, we also have WebSockets as WS and WSS. We're going to see this in our networking calls for our application that we have just created. So let's first see what's the point of using WebSockets. So let's say we have our client here, and let's say we have our server here. So what we could do is send constant requests from our client to our server in order to check if something has changed. And this is called polling. So for example, our client has to send a request. For example, he wants to check if there are any new login attempts, if there are any new users, or if anything changed. So our client is sending those requests. The server checks it, and in case there is something, he sends it back. But what if you want to have a connection where we don't want to do this? So if the server, I don't know, gets a new user, it's going to send automatically a message to the client. And in order to achieve that, a really good approach to use is WebSockets. So in a WebSocket type of communication, both WebSockets and HTTP are based on layer 7, and they use TCP from layer 4 as the means of communication. So what is actually going to happen is there is going to be a constant connection between the client and server. There is going to be, you can imagine this as a pipe between those two in which messages are exchanged. So the server can send something in, and the client can send something in, and the server can receive it, and the client can receive it over events, which is a really interesting approach when we need an application that does a lot of real-time stuff. So for example, analytics, communication, chat applications like Messenger, WhatsApp, and a lot of others use WebSocket technology. So let's have a look at the app that I have prepared here. So I have prepared the code in advance since I didn't really want to waste your time by typing HTML. So let us start. I have created a client and a server here. So the client is just a simple index.html file. This part is pretty standard, so just stuff for browser compatibility. I have a title, and I have a styles.css here, which actually doesn't exist, so we can actually remove this here. The important part is, in this case, we're going to use Socket.io as our client, and I have just used the script here from Cloudflare. We could have also downloaded this and included it, but I went for the easier solution. So we have that, then we have a button, which is just a send button, nothing special. And here we have our script part. What we want to do is we want to connect to our server. Our server is going to run on localhost 9090. And for that, we are using Socket.io, the stuff that we have imported right here. Now comes some pretty standard HTML stuff. We want to get the send button here, and we want to add an event listener. In case if you click on the button, we are going to emit a message. So the way how we are going to emit a message is by getting the socket that we have configured here and using emit. So this is going to send a message of the type chat with the payload. The payload is just going to be a string hello from client. We could use JSON, XML, whatever. You could send a file, image. I think from 2014 or 15 or 16 or something. You can also send images over Socket.io. And then the other part of it, we can listen to certain messages. So this is done by using socket on. In this case, we are listening on some type of message, and this is chat response. This can be named whatever. And this has a callback function in which we can, I don't know, print out something or process the data further. So let us save this and let's go to our server. So our server is initialized by npm init, which creates a package.json file, and the only dependencies that they have here are express and socket.io. And then we have our file server.js, and this is the interesting part. Let's see what this actually does. So we said that we're going to go over HTTP, and for that we're going to use Express, which will be our HTTP server. Then we are going to import socket.io, and we're going to initialize Express, pretty standard steps here. Now we're going to use some middleware in order to host our client here. So we could have also opened a new terminal and used some other hosting solution, but we're just going to use Express in order to host our static content here. Now we initialize our server and we're listening on port 9090. Now we need to do some server configuration in order to enable cores. And what we are basically going to do is enable our origins. And in this case, I have used localhost 9090 and localhost 3000 for a React app that I have been testing. But you could also enter a star here so anyone could access this resource. And the methods are going to be get and post for WebSocket, and the transports are going to be WebSocket and polling. So pretty basic stuff here also. Now we're going to initialize our I/O server by using socket.io, which is just the name we have used for requiring socket.io. And we're going to provide as the first input parameter our server. This is our Express server and our server configuration. As I have already mentioned, WebSockets run over HTTP. So the HTTP part is being taken care of Express. You don't need to use Express. You can also create a server from the socket.io library, which is also going to create an HTTP server. But in this case, I'm using Express because Express is going to provide a certain middleware, like this here, for example, and some other nice functionalities and features. So now we need to listen on a connection. So you want to listen on a connection server side. This is not something we would do on the client. This is something we do on the server. So we listen on a connection. Whenever we have a connection, we also receive the socket from that connection. And now we can do something with that socket. So what you need to understand here is the following. So we have our client and we have our server. Our server listens for a connection. So the server is listening and it listens for a connection. When a connection comes in, it is going to contain a socket, and that is going to be the socket from our client. And when that connection is established, we can listen to certain events. So in this case, we are listening, for example, to on chat. And we can listen for a lot of events here. Now, let's imagine another client connects with our server. We have a new socket being created here. And that socket is again listening on certain messages. And by that way, we have initialized a new task here, which is listening to that socket from that client and responding with some custom logic. So this is not really a professional way to draw this, but let's assume this is some backend work here. Now, let's imagine we have another client. He connects with the server, listening on the connection. This is our new socket, and something is being done with that socket, some calculations, database, queries, whatever. And we respond to that same socket. As you can see, this is pretty powerful. We can have a lot of connections this way, but there are a lot of possibilities. So what if we want to send, for example, from this connection here, if we want to send a message to this client? We can do this by using rooms, for example. We can join certain rooms and send messages to sockets in those rooms. When a socket connects, it is automatically being added to a room with the socket ID. but we can add it to rooms and send back to certain sockets. So for example, this is going socket emit, this is going to send a response to exactly the socket where the response came from. But let's say we want to send this, for example, for the first client, then we would use something like IO sockets in. We can specify a room, let's say it's room 1, this is just a string. So it could be a UUID, a string, a number, whatever. And then we can, for example, emit in that room. We can have certain logic, who joins which room and what is returned in which room. So this is basically how chat applications are created. If this is something you're interested in, let me know down in the comments and you can research a lot more on this topic, or I could make a new video on that if you're interested. But let's get back to our main goal here. We are emitting our chat message here. Now we need to listen on that. So we're listening on chat, we're just going to log this out and we're going to emit it back. So what we're going to emit back is a message of chat response, hello from server, and we also need to listen on that. So we're listening on this here. But as you see, we only have on the server the IO on connection. This is something we don't have on the client because this is listening on multiple sockets, but this also listens on the one socket that it comes from. So the server takes care of a lot of sockets and each client represents one socket. So let me start this application again and let me go to the client here. Let's refresh and let's click send. So when I click send, I'm getting a response, chat response, hello from server. And let's see what here happened. I'm getting a chat, hello from client. So I received the message from the client and returned a new message, which was again called here by the client. Sorry, by the client here. So as you can see, this is a pretty simple and basic example, but I hope I clarified some things here and this can help you get started. So if you're interested in this topic to learn more or would like me to create an app with this, let me know down in the comments below. So thank you so much for watching, see you next time and have a great one.